Listen, at the end of the day, I still think that there are conversations that need to be had face-to-face. It's still important to have those interactions. But at the same time, as a coach, coaching in this day and age, you have to be able to adapt and you have to be able to change. So you have to know what these different platforms are that they're using to communicate. You have to be in tune with that. And you probably have to be able to accept that some of your communication is going to be a little bit more through like a texting sort of avenue versus that face-to-face.
Hi, I'm Ted Bishop along with Crystal Morse, and we'd like to welcome you to episode 3 of the High School Golf Podcast. And today we're going to dive into a topic that I think is going to be really interesting and very important, and that's how to communicate with today's players, Crystal.
Yeah, we're excited about the episode today. We have an awesome guest today that I'm going to let you introduce. So, Ted, when we're talking about communicating with a high school golfer, a couple of things we're talking about are thinking about our practices, our matches, and really our seasons as a whole is getting the player to reach their goals, getting the player to be the best player that they can be in high school, right? So a lot of times what that involves is a lot of self-assessment. So the coach and the player working together to say, hey, during this practice session or after this match, what did you do good? And what do you need to improve on? And that's usually where the communication is the trickiest and the most challenging. When you're dealing with players and they need to make improvements, because all high school players at the level we're dealing with now, everybody can get better. Nobody is at their peak in high school when it comes to performance. So there's always improvement when it comes to either swing technique, course management, short game, handling your emotions, being a good teammate. So the challenge that we find that I find in communicating with high school golfers is how to motivate them, how to get them to make these improvements without coming across as critical or negative. And I think you can kind of go along those same lines.
Yeah, I would definitely say that my biggest challenge as a coach that I face is in communicating with players when honesty becomes construed as negativity. And you've heard me use this analogy a lot. It's like there's a line in the sand and you keep being more and more and more honest, and then at some point too much honesty gets construed as negativity. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to our guest today, and this is probably a topic that we will address, I would say, many times on this podcast.
It'll be definitely an underlying theme throughout. As you were talking, I was thinking about one of the hardest things is how do you push these players? Some players want to be pushed. They think they want to be pushed, but when you say, hey, this is what you have to do to get better, then they don't know how to handle that always at this age. So, Ted, why don't you introduce us to our guest today?
Very excited today to have Ambry Santillo on as our guest, and Ambry's my daughter. I'll be transparent about that as we get into this, but she touches every base that I think is valuable to this podcast. She started playing competitive golf when she was 8 years old. She had a tremendous high school career here in Indiana. She was 4-time All-State. She was a 3-time individual medal winner at the IHSA state finals, and that was back in the day when you had to finish 6th or better as an individual to get one of those IHSA medals. Ambry's best finish as an individual was 3rd. She played on 4 teams in our IHSA state finals that finished 3rd or better, 3 times 3rd place, 1 time a state runner-up. She played collegiately at Indiana University. She was a 2-time individual runner-up in tournaments at Baylor and Michigan, and she was named the St. John's women's golf coach in 2004, 3 months post-graduation from Indiana University as a player, and at the time was the youngest head coach in Division I college sports among all the men and women in any sports. And here we are 21 years later. She's now still at St. John's and coaching women's golf. So really should be a great resource for this podcast. And welcome, Ambry.
Welcome, Ambry. We're so excited to have you on the podcast. I'm going to go ahead and jump in because we have a lot of good topics to discuss with you today. So First of all, you started coaching at the college level within months after you graduated from IU. What was it like coaching players basically your own age?
Well, first off, thank you for having me on here today, and excited to talk to you guys about some of the different things in college golf. But yeah, I mean, at the time, obviously super exciting coming out of college. I had kind of identified in my junior year that coaching was kind of my next step and what I wanted to do. I wanted to remain in golf and stay competitive, but I didn't necessarily want to continue to compete. I kind of went through the process of applying to a bunch of places, and St. John's is where I landed. The challenge of starting right out of college, I mean, there's pluses and minuses of that. I think the pluses are you're just removed out of the situation of being a player in college golf. So hopefully you can relate to the players that you're coaching. You have those same experiences. You kind of know what the day in and day out schedule grind is, and you can kind of hopefully help them through that, add, some perspective. Obviously the challenge of, any position when you're now the kind of supervisor of people your own age, that's challenging, because I think you have to do a lot of extra work to kind of gain some respect, and rightfully so. I think that my situation was even tougher because I was also their third coach in 3 years. So I think that just the challenge of making sure that you were well prepared and kind of proving to them that you're capable of doing this job, even though you're the same age, those are all the challenges that you probably go through when you start at a younger age.
So now you're in your 21st year of college coaching in women's golf. How would you say that communication has changed over the years, and what do you feel like are your biggest challenges today in communicating with your players?
Well, obviously, communication has changed a ton. We're in a world where we're definitely more on our phones and using texting. I mean, even email, I feel like, has gone a little bit by the wayside. It's more of that texting communication. Listen, at the end of the day, I still think that there are conversations that need to be had face-to-face. It's still important to have those interactions. But at the same time, as a coach, coaching in this day and age, you have to be able to adapt and you have to be able to change. So you have to know what these different platforms are that they're using to communicate. You have to be in tune with that. And you probably have to be able to accept that some of your communication is going to be a little bit more through like a texting sort of avenue versus that face-to-face. So I think you just have to kind of weigh the situation, hopefully be able to continue to have some of your traditional communication that I think is really effective, and really, in my case too, kind of their next stage in life when they go into the career world. But then I think that you have to be able to be realistic to know that they probably respond a little bit better to some of that texting style communication as well.
How do you develop that initial connection with the player? Does that take a little bit more time, or do you find that to be something that's easier or harder than it was initially?
No, I definitely think it's harder. I think, just like I said, the face-to-face conversations and the kids today in general, I think that they don't feel as comfortable having them. They're not used to having those. So, and to me, that's the best way to get to know somebody and to kind of develop those relationships. So, yeah, I mean, for me, the good news for me is, especially having some international players, I'm developing a lot of that initial communication through texting, through FaceTime calls, through video calls. So that's how we're kind of establishing, and then we're meeting in person, months later, potentially. And then you kind of start that face-to-face. And when you get into the face-to-face, then that's probably when I try and get my conversations just, a little bit more personal on the day-to-day. How's your day going? How's school going? How's, your living situation going? And try to kind of build from that, because like I said, for me, I haven't had a lot of that face-to-face interaction, so that's important. But it's little things. I mean, we go to a practice in a van, and I think about my teams 20 years ago. Everyone kind of was talking in the van because people weren't listening to headphones. There wasn't all these other things. Now you get in a van, and like, if you don't initiate it, you could have 8 girls tuned into headphones and it's dead silence. So, And it's no fault to them. It's not that people are trying to be social. It's what they do in this day and age. When you have those moments to create some conversation, you definitely have to do it. But you also have those moments where you've kind of let everybody be.
As a coach, when do you decide when face-to-face communication really needs to take place versus texting with individual players?
Yeah, what I've kind of learned is obviously any type of bigger issues, or if you feel like even there's an underlying issue there on maybe their performance and you can't quite get to the bottom of it, on there might be something non-related to golf, but you just kind of need to talk it through. So, I mean, we do individual meetings throughout the year just to kind of have that opportunity. The interesting part about that, though, is I've even found in those individual meetings, it's really hard for some of the kids today to kind of talk through some of that stuff. I'll actually I've had where you sit there and you talk to somebody for 20 or 30 minutes, and then all of a sudden, 30 minutes after you have the meeting, you're getting a text about things that they forgot to kind of communicate to you, which I don't know if they forgot as much as they just struggle to do it face to face. It's more comforting to them to do it through text. So that's hard, I think, for people that have been around this for a while, because we're probably a little bit more used to the face to face. But I try and take advantage of that whenever. I'm also realistic to know I'm going to have some conversations through text that I probably don't want to have through text. But sometimes too, I feel like if it's a bigger issue, I will communicate through face to face, but then I will also maybe try and do a little bit of a follow up through text or email, just so it's a little bit more in writing, so everyone's on the same page and there's nothing lost in translation.
Getting the players to be able to communicate how they are feeling, especially for these young players that we're coaching, like the 14 to 17-year-olds, for them to be able to verbalize, hey, coach, I'm really nervous going into this tournament, or hey, coach, I have this issue. That's hard for them. And I think that's one thing I've really noticed just this year, that it's like, okay, they don't even know how to communicate what they're feeling or what they're thinking half the time. I think that one-to-one interaction we're finding more and more important, because that's when you're going to be able to, over time, they're going to be more and more comfortable. They just don't know how to communicate what they're feeling or what they're thinking.
Yeah, and I think even little things, like you can send a group text and you can have nobody respond to you. You're kind of like, okay, did everyone get this? But I've learned even with that, when that first started happening, I almost took that personally. But now I've learned that, unfortunately, and I'm not saying it's right, and I try and get my players to respond, but that's also a little bit how they react to communication. It's not so much they're not taking it in. It's not so much they don't agree or they don't like it. You just might not get much of a reaction. And I think that that's hard to accept, but I always make myself feel better when I talk to other coaches, and I feel like we kind of have this line that, basically it's same situations, just a different logo. So I feel like when I talk to my other coaching friends, like similar thing with the communication, no reaction, all those things. So I do think that it's just a little bit of what they're used to and how they communicate in this day and age.
So when I send one of those texts out, and at the end of the text I say to my players, respond yes or no, so I know, in fact, you received this text and read it. Am I showing my age?
Well, like I said, I think you're only showing your age when you send something and you don't get a response, and then you fire back on why you didn't get a response. But no, listen, I think when I have an important text that I need to know that everybody saw, because there is no reaction most of the time, I will include, please respond with, basically some sort of indication you got this text. So I think you have to pick and choose when you do that, but you also have to come to terms to know a lot of times when you're sending that communication, they're taking it in. You're just not going to get a response.
Did you hear that, Ted? Okay. Ted doesn't like no response. No response.
I'm his daughter. I'm fully aware of that.
So, Ambry, you have a close relationship with the St. John's men's coach in the program. How different is the communication, the approach that you take between the men's versus the women's team? I know you don't coach the men's team, but have you had conversations where you just find the approach is different and you're like, oh, wow, we're dealing with different things here, or the communication is totally different?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of always tease the men's coach if we talk about how we might handle something. I normally it comes with a joke at some point, like, wow, we handle this way different as far as that communication factor. Not that we aren't in line with probably how we're thinking and feeling and how the situation needs to be handled, but just how you go about it, I definitely think it's different. In college golf, we have a lot of coaches that coach both men and women at their universities, and I'm always intrigued by just kind of learning. So are things the same or different? And I think there's a lot of differences because at the end of the day, we're different types of human beings. So yeah, I mean, I think with the women, there's probably a certain degree of, I don't want to say softer delivery, but a little bit more of a delivery where if you have to deliver a negative, you're really trying to throw a lot of positives into that as well. You're probably trying to make them feel more part of the circumstance or situation, like you're problem solving together to hopefully get a more effective end result. With the men, from my understanding, I think you could probably be a little bit more direct. And they might not always love it, but they're probably going to react. Where I have found my players probably don't respond that great to like some of that harshness, which is hard because sometimes you want to show tough love because you think that that's going to be the most effective, but they almost take that personally, and it's never the intent. Your intent is to try and help them improve and help them make the situation better for them. But, you know, unfortunately how you go about that, I think, is different, and you have to be pretty strategic, and especially with the women and how you deliver that message.
Well, it's some really good stuff there. I would assume that, obviously, as I mentioned in the intro, you played at a high level at all levels, and I would assume a lot of times when you're coaching, you're putting yourself in the place of the player, trying to equate things to the way they were when you were holding the golf club. But as you've gone through your coaching career, what would you say that you have learned, good and bad, from maybe the coaches that you played for?
I think that, you know, every time you play for people, they're different, and there's definitely positives and negatives for all the coaches that I've had in my life. I think some of the good that I've learned is just to, you know, have good attitudes, to always give it 100%, to work hard, and to be a team player. I think especially in golf, it's, you know, considered a very individual sport. But I think that team success, because we don't get to experience it that much, is so much fun, and it's nice to have teammates. I still, to this day, I have a group text with, you know, a handful of my college teammates that, you know, we very rarely talk about golf. It's about life. It's about Indiana basketball. You know, it's about all these things that are just fun to kind of talk about. And that really happens through just the positivity of being on that team and having those connections. And I think most coaches are going to encourage you to kind of have those bonds. So I think that that's always good. I've played for some really tough coaches that honestly you probably had to dig yourself out of some mental stuff from time to time. I think the big picture is once again, they were trying to make you better, trying to get you to compete at the highest level you could compete at. But I also think that sometimes they might not realize how much that tore you down in certain areas. I think that I try and be a little bit aware of that when I'm coaching. I'm a pretty individual player when I'm out on the golf course. I don't need a lot of hand holding. It's a little bit of my style as far as I try and give players some space. So I would say, you know, I had a coach like that as well. And I actually, you know, at times you might not appreciate that, but later in life you realize that was probably a good thing because it made you able to get through tough situations and not have to feel like you could only get through it if you had your coach right there by your side.
Well, speaking of coaching legends, obviously there's a tremendous amount of excitement right now at St. John's with the men's basketball team, and you have an absolute coaching legend there in Rick Pitino. What would you say as a women's golf coach at St. John's that you've learned from watching Rick Pitino coach?
Well, I think just to see what he's done in the 2 years that he's been at St. John's is pretty remarkable. You know, we're a great school in the Big East, but we're also, like a lot of schools where, resources aren't always as great as they are at some of the big schools. And I think he's gotten really creative in how he's been able to manage that and really come up, with ways to provide all the resources that he needs to compete at the highest level. I think his ability to just be extremely focused on the task and demand excellence from his players is always something that you like. And I think that that's good for just the overall culture of your athletic department. I think the other kids, they're very in tune into what's going on with basketball. So to see their success, but also know that, they have a lot of fun, but they have a lot of tough days too, as far as hard work and discipline. I think that's really good just to be surrounded by, and definitely helps everybody around the athletic department.
Ambry, kind of a two-part question here. So the first one, as high school coaches, we have, I would say, a majority of our players that are not going to play college golf, and that we really just want to get them to be the best high school players they can be. What advice would you give to some of the players or some of the parents, just some overall advice for those that are not going to play college golf? If they already know it, how would you have them approach high school golf? What would you say to them to encourage them to just have a really good experience in high school?
Yeah, well, first off, I think, your average person does not play college golf or, college sports. And when you talk to a lot of adults, they'll talk about some of their greatest memories growing up were what they did in their high school days with sports. So I think just having those memories and having those experiences, first off, they're priceless for one thing. And then, golf is unique in the sense of it's a sport you can play for the majority of your life. It's a sport that is very beneficial in the business world. So unlike some other high school sports that you play, when you hang it up and maybe not go on to college, that might be the end of that sport for you for the most part in your life. But golf doesn't have to be that way. So I think gaining that experience and gaining those competitive experiences are going to be very beneficial to other things that you do throughout your life, because I think golf will probably always remain in your life, hopefully, to some degree. And I think the experiences you get from high school golf will really, really help you in those other settings with golf.
One of the things is challenging here, probably more that we've noticed probably with our girls team, is that golf is, it's a challenging sport. It's a hard sport. You're out there on your own. The coaches are spread among the entire golf course, all 5 players. So there may not be a lot of emotional support from your coaches while you're playing. And obviously spectators can't get involved. So you're on your own, and it's a hard, challenging sport. And depending on the level of competition we're playing, it can be a struggle. And I find that some girls struggle with being able just kind of, okay, this is really challenging. Do I really want to put myself through this in high school?
Yeah, but the reality of it is they're going to have challenges and other things that they do in their life. So when they go to college, they're going to experience the first time on their own. So that dynamic of, you said that although you have your coaches and teammates, golf is unique, and you have a lot of time periods where you are by yourself and you have to figure things out. Well, guess what? You got to do that when you get to college. Then when you graduate from college, you're going to enter that career world. You might be in a totally new location with 0 friends. So guess what? You're going to have to figure it out. So I think the more you can put yourself in challenging situations, whether you decide to continue to play golf or not, it's a great sport that kind of helps set you up to have to network, to, have to kind of do some things on your own, and that only does help you in other circumstances later on in life.
All right, last question. Recruiting has changed with the transfer portal and roster limits now. What would be your advice to today's high school players?
Well, I did a college golf seminar a few weeks ago with a bunch of coaches in the area, and obviously the same question came up, and I think people have to be realistic. I think we're living in a volatile time right now in college athletics, a lot of uncertainty, and I think you just have to take advantage of opportunities that are out in front of you. I think unfortunately right now, and I hope I'm wrong on this, we might be getting into a time period where we actually are experiencing a little fewer opportunities than we once did with these roster limits and just budget cuts. So I think the world of kids thinking oh, I can get everything and more than everything from all these places, and not appreciating actually what they're getting and always wanting more. I think that attitude might need to take a little bit of a step back with what we're going through, and just appreciate the fact that if you have an opportunity to play, you have a scholarship, like that's probably, it could possibly be here in a few years more than what, some other programs might be able to offer. So I think you got to, I don't want to say scale back, but I think you just want to be realistic to your options. And once again, just when you're going through the process, I just think that you cannot be closed off right now, because with the roster limits, a lot of teams that maybe gave people opportunities that, maybe it was borderline whether a person was going to play for them, but the coach was still willing to take a risk on them because they could help out down the road. Well, right now, a lot of coaches, they're just going with what they know can help them right now because we're getting cut with these roster limits. So I just think that people probably need to readjust a little bit and not be so dead set on one spot, or dead set that they should be getting above and beyond what's being offered, because that just might not be the case anymore. I don't know if that all makes sense, but I think that's maybe what we're going to see.
Yeah, best advice for those players in high school who do have some interest in playing college golf on how to reach out to college coaches, how to sell themselves, how to put themselves out there. I know there's recruiting services, all that stuff. You didn't use one of those when you were playing, but what would be just one last bit of advice that you could give those players?
Putting yourself out there is important. I mean, listen, there's a lot of great recruiting services out there, but I don't think that that's the way that if you don't have the funds to do that, don't want to do that, I don't think it's going to hold you back. I think if you put yourself out there in a professional way, introducing yourself through email, having a good resume, that's going to go just as far, sometimes even further than just being one of 10 kids in a recruiting service that's getting sent out. So I think it's how you present your information and making sure that it's good. I also think that just little things, once again, this came up in that seminar I did. I mean, you would not believe the amount of emails we get where a kid addresses the coach by the wrong name or puts in the wrong school in their introductory letter. We get it's a copy and paste, but that's an automatic no. As far as when you get that email, you're like, next. Okay. So like I said, it's just the little things. Paying attention to the details goes a long way in that process. And like I said, just presenting yourself in a professional, good manner goes a long way as well.
That's awesome. Ambry, this has been fantastic. I feel like there's been a lot of good information that you've shared that can really help coaches, players, parents, really everybody in the high school golf realm. So we really appreciate all your insight, all your perspective, and just really have enjoyed being able to have you on the podcast.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate being part of it. And I know this is for all golfers, but I appreciate everything you guys do at Franklin Community High School, being a former player and alumni. So continue that great work, but thanks again for everything.
Thank you, Ambry, and good luck in your spring season.
Thank you. You guys as well.
Well, Crystal, I think that was really good, and I guess what I appreciate from that conversation is just, as I said in the beginning, she touches every base as it relates to a young player, a high school player, a college player, and now a successful college coach who actually, interestingly, and I failed to mention this in her introduction, won the Big East Championship in that first year that she coached back in 2004 and 5 and was named Big East Coach of the Year. And I jokingly said to her at the time, I'm like, look, you may want to consider retirement because for you it's probably all downhill from this point.
Yeah, great insight from Ambry. Really, I mean, I learned stuff just listening to her speak about how she coaches her team and kind of how that's changed. And it's just interesting with the text messaging versus one-on-one, how that's kind of changed over the years. In high school, it's very structured practice, so our players are coming here every day after school, so we may have more opportunity to get that one-on-one than versus maybe a college coach that may not have that luxury of having their whole team together every day.
Yeah, I think the other thing that was interesting to me is the question we asked Ambry about communicating with men versus women. And I think that's exactly what she said is what we see even at the high school level, communicating with girls versus boys. And I think the most profound thing that I heard in that message for me as a coach is that problem solving is a joint endeavor. It needs to involve both the coach and the player.
I think we've learned that over the years, and it's something we have to adjust our mindset a little bit for every season. We look forward to trying to be better coaches every season and use everything we learned.
Yeah, the other thing, and I mean, you've already alluded to it, but we do a lot of individual player meetings. And I think with the girls, in particular, we found that individual player meetings are really more effective than dressing anything in front of the entire team, because it gets sometimes misconstrued as to what the message might be. But to hear what she said about how, even at the college level, how uneasy some individuals are in those face-to-face meetings is kind of eye-opening. You know, I remember in 2014 when I was president of the PGA of America, I was given the honor of being an old master at Purdue. And I spent 3 days going around campus and speaking to different classes. And 11 years ago, the message I was giving college students back then was that they needed to learn how to develop verbal face-to-face skills, that a lot of their communication was on some kind of a device, an electronic device, and I just felt like it was a lost art. And you can call me old school, an old man, whatever you want to say to me, but I still feel like that's valuable skills that any of our young people can learn today. And I'm going to say this as an employer who hires people who come into job interviews with the best verbal skills are usually the ones that walk away with the job, no matter what their qualifications were. So as a coach, I'm still not going to lose sight of what I feel like is my responsibility to help coach players up in developing verbal skills.
I think you're spot on there. And even as an instructor, I find with students that I have, the more engaged they are, whether it's during a lesson or during practice, just any one-on-one personal communication, the more engaged they are, the more they can make eye contact, the more they can give feedback. Giving feedback is something that needs to be developed as well. But the more that they can learn to do that, the more they're going to improve. They improve quicker is what I should say. And maybe I just see quicker improvement. They're more engaged in the process. So anything that we can do, and it's hard with coaches, we try to instill that. But again, we only get our players during a short amount of time. I think it's something that is instilled on a day-to-day basis. We do as much as we can for coaches. Parents, just a little tip for you, the more that you can get your kids to make eye contact, to have that communication, with adults, with people that aren't their age, and to be able to give feedback is just a really crucial life skill that I think can be developed.
It is, I sit here and my head spins when we get on this topic, and I think in my own personal situation as a coach, there have been girls in particular that have come into our program that I have struggled with communicating effectively with when they were a freshman. And some of the best relationships that I have with players that I have coached are those very girls who there was some type of an evolution that took place. And I wish I knew exactly what it was. Either I got to be a better communicator over the last 3 years that they played, they got to be a better verbal communicator, and when they left the program, we had a tremendous relationship, and we stay in touch with each other as they go into college and don't talk about golf, get texts from them on any particular subject. But that's very gratifying as a coach when you look at how those relationships evolved. But it's something that it's just a mystery to me.
Yeah, there's a lot of mysteries in coaching for sure we come across. But I think that's the fun of coaching. That's the challenge. That's one thing that we enjoy from coaching is the challenge of it and how it evolves and it makes us better. And I think as coaches, if you have that self-assessment and that perspective of what can I do to be better? How can I be better to the kids? That makes it more interesting and makes it fun, and we have a good time with it.
Well, this has been Ted Bishop along with Crystal Morse, and you've listened to Episode 3 on how to communicate with today's players. We appreciate your listening. Again, if you want to contact us directly, my email address is tedbishop38pga@aol.com.
And mine is crystal@thelegendsgolfclub.com.